Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I'm Jack, and it's great to have you all with us.
And I'm Julia. We're really excited about today's topic because it's something that can make a big difference in your life if you apply it. Yeah, setting goals is like giving yourself a roadmap. Without it, you're just wandering around without a clear direction. So, before we jump into why it's important, Jack, do you set goals?
Absolutely, Julia. I've always been the type of person who likes to plan things out. Whether it's work-related or personal goals, I always write them down. How about you? Do you follow a similar approach?
I used to be more spontaneous and just go with the flow, but I realized that didn't get me very far. So, now I've become more intentional about setting goals, especially after I saw how much of a difference it made for me. Like, for example, I used to be more spontaneous and just go with the flow, but I realized that didn't get me very far. So, now I've become more intentional about setting goals, especially after I saw how much of a difference it made for me. Like, for example,
Fitness is a great example. It's one of those areas where you really need clear goals. Just saying, I want to get fit doesn't work because it's too vague. Instead, something like, I want to work out 3 times a week for the next month, is a goal.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the main reasons people struggle with achieving their goals. They don't make them clear or actionable. Like, when we set a goal, it has to be something we can measure, so we know we're making progress.
Right. That's where SMART goals come in. I'm sure most of our listeners have heard about SMART goals, but in case anyone hasn't, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. These 5 elements help make sure your GOA.
Yes. And when I first learned about SMART goals, it really changed the way I approached things. For example, instead of just saying I wanted to save money, I broke it down into something specific like, I want to save $100 each month for the next 6.
Exactly. Let's break that down for everyone. So your goal was specific. You knew how much you wanted to save. It was measurable. You could easily track if you were meeting that $100 each month. It was achievable. $100 is a realistic amount. It was really
Right. And it worked. I stuck to it and reached my savings goal by the end of the 6 months. It really proved to me how effective SMART goals are.
That's a great example. I think another important thing about setting goals is making sure you're not overwhelming yourself. Sometimes, people set too many goals or make them too big, and they end up feeling discouraged when they don't achieve them.
Oh, I've definitely been guilty of that. I remember one year I set about 10 New Year's resolutions, and by February, I had already forgotten half of them. It was just too much.
Exactly. It's all about balance. It's better to focus on a few key goals and break them down into smaller steps. That way, you can celebrate small wins along the way, which keeps you motivated. For instance, if you have a big goal like learning NE.
Yes. And that's something I love about goal setting. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey too. The process of working towards a goal teaches you discipline, focus, and even how to handle setbacks. That's a great point. Sometimes we only focus on the end result and forget that the journey is just as important. In fact, I'd say the lessons you learn while pursuing a goal are often more valuable than the goal itself.
That's a great point. Sometimes we only focus on the end result and forget that the journey is just as important. In fact, I'd say the lessons you learn while pursuing a goal are often more valuable than the goal itself.
I totally agree. And setbacks are a big part of that journey. I think a lot of people get discouraged when they don't meet a goal right away, but it's important to remember that setbacks are normal. Have you ever set a goal that didn't go as planned?
Plenty of times. One that comes to mind is when I was trying to run a marathon. I had a strict training schedule, but I ended up injuring my ankle halfway through the training. I had to stop and rest for weeks, and it felt like a huge setback.
That's a great example. It's all about adjusting and staying flexible. Just because things don't go exactly as planned doesn't mean you've failed. Sometimes, You just need to adapt and keep moving forward.
Exactly. Flexibility is key. And speaking of setbacks, let's talk about motivation for a second. Staying motivated can be tough, especially when you're working on a long-term goal. What do you do to stay motivated, Julia? Great question. I think motivation comes and goes, so I don't rely on it too much. Instead, I build habits. For example, if I'm working towards a goal, I try to make it part of my daily or weekly routine, like with my fitness goals.
Great question. I think motivation comes and goes, so I don't rely on it too much. Instead, I build habits. For example, if I'm working towards a goal, I try to make it part of my daily or weekly routine. Like with my fitness goals.
That's a great approach. Building habits definitely makes a difference. I also think it helps to have accountability. Whether it's telling a friend about your goal or writing it down somewhere visible, having that reminder keeps you on track.
Yes. Accountability is huge. Sometimes I'll tell a friend or family member about a goal I'm working on, and they'll check in with me to see how I'm doing. It's a great way to stay motivated and feel supported.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening, I encourage you to share your goals with someone you trust. You'd be surprised how much a little support and encouragement can help.
Definitely. So, Jack, before we wrap up, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's just starting to set goals?
My advice would be to start small. Don't overwhelm yourself with too many big goals at once. Pick one or two things you really want to focus on, make them smart, and then break them down into smaller steps.
I love that. My advice would be to write your goals down. There's something powerful about putting your goals on paper or even in a digital app. It makes them feel real, and you can refer back to them whenever you need a reminder.
Great advice, Julia. Well, that's all we have for today. We hope you found this episode helpful and that you feel inspired to set some new goals.
Yes, and remember, it's never too late to start. Whether your goal is big or small, take that first step today. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yes, and remember, it's never too late to start. Whether your goal is big or small, take that first step today. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care and keep going after your goals.